In today's video, I'm going to show you how to go out and create equal height columns inside a bricks builder. So here's an example of why you might want to go and do this. As I resize the browser here, you can see that as it pulls into about here, the middle column is taller in height than the ones on either side. And I think it's going to look a lot neater if they're all equal heights. So if we go back here and we go edit with bricks, and we go down to those three columns, if I click on the column and I just move myself up here for a second and we collapse this, so we have the parent here and we have the three columns inside. All we actually need to do in Bricks Builder is click onto the parent here, and then down here on the align cross axis, we just click to stretch. And that's all we need to do. So if we go ahead and just save this for now and go back to the front end and reload, when we pull this in now, you'll see that they maintain their heights as equal, which is here. So the bottoms of the columns now all line up. It's a lot neater. Now coming back here into Bricks Builder, from what I just showed you, you know that you need to click on this icon here. And if you hover, it says stretch. So you might go, okay, I just need to remember to click the stretch icon to make them stretch here. But it's actually not as simple as that. And if you've been subscribed to my channel for a while now, you know that I don't just like to show you what icons to click here in a WordPress page builder to get the layout that you actually want to achieve. Because if you don't understand what each of these icons is doing behind the scenes in terms of the CSS that they're generating, then you're always just going to be clicking random icons here until you get the layout that you want. I want to help you actually understand what's happening in terms of the CSS when you click on each of these icons. And to do that, we're going to go over to here and we're going to write some custom CSS, create our equal columns here just using normal HTML, normal CSS. And in doing so, you'll better understand why clicking this icon gives you the equal height columns. So coming back here into our code editor, let's go through what's actually happening when we click that icon in Bricks Builder. So here I'm going to go ahead and create a div for the container. And then inside there, we're going to create our children or our columns. So here, let's go ahead and add a div with a class of column. And then in our column, let's go ahead and add some content. So we'll add an image up the top. And then let's do something similar to this. So we'll add a title, maybe a little bit of text here. So here I'll add a div with a CSS class of content. And then inside there, we will add our title. So let's just do, for example, a H3. And we'll give it the class of title, my title. And then let's add a paragraph in here with just some dummy text like this. And I think you get the point. So here, let's go ahead and just get this column and we'll just create three of them. So 1 and 2. So there's 2 more. So now we have 3 columns. And if I collapse this, it's going to be a little bit easier to see. So we have a main container here with the class container. And then inside there, we have 3 divs with the class col. So let's first go ahead and style the columns. So I'll do .col. So we're targeting these 3 items now. And then inside here, let's do a box shadow 0, 0. So it's going to be 30 pixels. And let's just do a light gray like that. And we'll do a border radius of 10 pixels. So now they have a rounded corner. And let's do a padding of 2 rem all the way around. And lastly, let's give this a background color of white. Actually, for the padding, let's do 1 rem just so there's not as much space so that when we sit them next to each other, it's a little bit easier to see. So now let's go ahead and sit these 3 columns next to each other and then we'll make them equal heights. So to sit them next to each other, we're going to be using the CSS layout model of Flexbox. And that CSS layout system called Flexbox is actually what Bricks Builder uses to lay out your items on the page. If you're liking the video so far, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel so you get notified when I release content like the one that you're watching right now. Thank you very much. Now let's go back to the video. So if we have a look here on the screen back in Bricks Builder, you can see that on our parent here, where the 3 cards are inside it, its display is by default set to Flex, which is Flexbox. And then it has Flex Wrap. And if we click here, Flex Direction, and we have some other items here, which are all related to Flexbox. And that's why it's really important that we go in here inside our code editor and write our CSS from scratch and build up our Flexbox system by ourselves using standard CSS. And in doing so, when we jump back into here, it's just going to make a whole lot more sense as to why we click this icon here to stretch. So to go ahead and apply Flexbox to this here, we need to target the parent, which is the container. So I'm going to come up to here and we'll do .container. And then inside there, we do display and then flex. So now those 3 items are sat next to each other, and you'll be able to see that if I scroll across here, there they are. The reason that it's overflowing here and we have this scroll bar is because here in codepen.io, the images actually have a width. So we just need to set these to max width. So here I'll just do image and we'll do max width of 100%, and now they will resize. And now you can see our 3 columns are sat next to each other. Now, the next thing that I want to show you is if I just move myself over and we have a look at what's going on here. So I'm going to go right click and then inspect. And then here with the container selected, our parent container, if I go to the computer tab, which shows me all the CSS that's applying to that item, we can go down and see all the CSS properties that are currently applied to our container element. Now you'll notice 2 different things on the screen here. These ones here where it says display flex, you can see they're a bit more bolder. The opacity is at 100%. Then we have these other ones that are grayed out. They're sort of like an 80% opacity. They're a little bit faded. The difference between the 2 there here is because display flex, the bolder ones at 100% opacity are the ones that I have defined. So I have personally defined these in my CSS, or Bricks Builder has defined them. Someone has defined them. The alternative to that is the browser. So the ones that are sort of grayed out is what the browser uses by default. So we can see here flex-direction being defaulted to row. This flex direction property defaults to row in your browser. If I came back here and did flex direction column, like that, you can see now that's gone a bit more bolder and it's at 100% opacity because I've applied it, not the browser. So flex direction I've set to column, and you can see now they're going down in a column like this. Now I'm going to go back here and set this to row, which we know is what the browser uses by default. And I want to go through what this is actually doing in Flexbox, because this is going to be important when we come back and look at this stretch icon to make our columns equal height. So sticking here inside of Bricks Builder, the next thing that we need to understand to know what this stretch icon is doing is the difference between the main axis, which it says over here, and the cross axis. So as you can see, these icons are here inside of Bricks Builder, but these are actually properties that you set for Flexbox. So what is the difference between the main axis and the cross axis? It actually all relates to this up here, the flex direction being either a column or a row. And you can see when I hover here on direction, it says flex-direction. That's what we're writing over here. So when you change the flex direction from a row or a column, you're actually altering the main axis and the cross axis. So let me show you what I mean. So as we know, the default browser sets the flex direction to row. When you set that, it sets the main axis to be horizontal. So if I just draw on the screen here, when this is flex direction row, in our example up here, the main axis is across here. So I'll just write that. So this is going to be the main axis. Now, if this is the main axis going across the row, across the x-axis, then the cross axis is going to go vertically down here. So I'll just type that cross axis. And so the important thing to understand here with Flexbox is when you set the flex direction to row, the main axis goes along the row, and the opposite of that, the other axis, is the cross axis, which goes vertically. Now, this actually inverts when we change the flex direction. So here on our screen, if I just undo that, if we change the flex direction here to be a column, what that's doing is it's taking our main axis that was going across here and it's making the main axis go down the column, so vertically. So it's changed it, it's flipped it. So now this is going to be our main axis, and the opposite of that is going to be our cross axis. So now our cross axis is going along the row. So now I'll just write there cross axis. So this here is a fundamental concept that you really need to understand to be able to use Bricks Builder and other page builders, because more and more page builders are coming out and adopting Flexbox and other things that we're going to look at in future videos here on YouTube, like CSS Grid. But this is just something that is a matter of fact, it's happening, it's inside our page builders, and it's worth learning. And just knowing this, that the flex direction sets the main axis and the opposite of that is the cross axis, that one thing is going to help you know exactly what icons to click on. Because as you can see, these icons here align your items along the main axis and along the cross axis. And so if we were to go ahead and just get this title and maybe make it quite a bit bigger like that, so it's a lot longer, maybe even longer still, and we come back to our parent container, which has flexbox and its flex direction is row, so the main axis is going along the row, then we know our column's height is along the cross axis. So we want to stretch the height of our columns along the cross axis, which is down here, align cross axis, and we want to stretch them. If I undo that, again, our main axis, because it's a flex direction here of row, our main axis is along here. So we want to get the cross axis and stretch it top and bottom. So down here, align cross axis, stretch top and bottom. Now they're stretched. Now again, the whole purpose of this video is that you might just get in the habit of knowing if you want to make equal height columns, you click here on row and then you click this on stretch and you get that. But now from watching today's video, you understand why that is the case, because you understand what's happening here at the CSS level. Now I have some other really cool things that I want to go through in this video today that's going to just make using Bricks Builder and Flexbox a whole lot simpler for you. But before we get into that, let's go back to our code editor and let's finish off this example by making these equal heights. So back here, let's go ahead and make one of these not the same height as the others. So I'm going to get this paragraph here inside this one and just duplicate it a couple of times. So now the middle is larger than the others. But you'll notice, wait, these columns are already equal height. What's going on here? So now we get to dig deeper into some other CSS properties in regards to Flexbox. I promise this is all worth your time in learning and mastering and understanding what it's actually doing. It's going to make building websites so much easier. So what's going on here? Why are these equal heights to start? So remember when I came in here and we had flex direction row, and with it being row, the main axis was along the row here, and then the opposite axis was the cross axis. So thus the cross axis is going vertically like this. In Flexbox, we have two other properties that handle laying out the items along each axis. So when we want to lay out items across the main axis like this, we use justify content, which if we go to W3 schools and scroll down for the justify content property, we can see its default value is flex start. So back here, justify content default is flex start. And don't worry, I'm going to go through what these are in a second, but I will add a comment here, and this is going to be for the main axis. And then the opposite of that, the cross axis, to lay out items along the cross axis, you use align items. And its default value, if we go back here and search for align items, which is this one here, and we go down a bit, you can see its default value is normal. And if we go down a little bit, it says value, normal, default. And it behaves like stretch, and stretch over here, items are stretched to fit their container. So coming back here, align items is by default in the browser set to stretch. And this is for the cross axis. So now let's put everything that we've learned in today's video together. We've done display flex. The flex direction is row, so the main axis is going across here. The opposite of the main axis is the cross axis, which is going vertically. And we know that we use align items to change how items are laid out along the cross axis, so vertically, and this is set to stretch by default in our browser. So along the cross axis, which is the vertical axis, they're stretched from the top to the bottom. So in the default browser, these are equal height columns. So that's how we would go out and create equal height columns here using some standard native CSS and writing the rules and properties by ourselves. So now let's jump over into Bricks Builder and recreate what we've done here with our custom CSS and custom HTML inside this blank page in Bricks Builder and see what's happening when you use Bricks Builder by default. So firstly, let's go ahead and then inside here, let's add a section. And we know that the section adds a section element and a container. And I'm just going to give this a background so we can see what we're doing. So on the section, I'll come down here and make its background something like a pale yellow like that. And then inside this container, we're going to add our columns. And then in here, I'm going to go ahead and add a block element. So I'll add that in there and I'll just rename this block element to a column. And then inside here, let's go ahead and add an image element. And I'll just quickly select an image from our media library. So I'll just click this one here. And then under that, let's add a heading element. And then let's add some basic text. And let's lastly add a button element. So I'll just reorder this by dragging and dropping and the heading up the top. So we have the image up the top, heading, basic text, and the button. Now I probably want to have some padding here down the bottom. So let's go ahead and I'm going to right click this heading element. And I'm just going to wrap this in a div and I'll just drag the basic text and the button inside there. So the heading, basic text, and button are inside there. And then on this div, let's add some padding. So I'll go to the style tab, layout, and then padding. We'll just lock it and we'll do 1 rem everywhere around, or we'll try 2 rem like that. Now back here on our column, let's give it a background color. So I'll go down to background and then here I'm going to make it a white color. And then here under border, let's go here and give it a border radius of say 10 pixels all around. And then here under box shadow, let's just add a box shadow of something like 30 pixels. And the color is going to be a really, it's going to stand out so we can see what we're doing here. I might make that 15. Obviously, this isn't going to win any design awards, but it helps me get the point across of what we're doing here. So now that we've got our columns there, let's collapse this. And I'm just going to get this column and duplicate it. So here I'm going to go duplicate and I'll do it one more time and we'll go duplicate. So now we have our 3 columns here. And then to sit them next to each other, we need to go up to the parent, the container here, and then here under content. By default, Bricks Builder for a container element has set its display to Flexbox. So we've already got this applied to the parent display flex. Now we just need to change the flex direction to row. So coming back here with the container selected, where the flex direction is, all we need to do is go over to row and click row. And now they're sitting next to each other. Now you might be wondering, but Grant, you said when we were going through and doing our custom CSS before, flex direction row is actually the default value that your browser uses. So why in Bricks Builder are we actually having to set it to row? Now, the reason that is by default, Bricks Builder doesn't use what the browser uses by default. Instead of using row, Bricks Builder actually sets it to column. And that's why if we click back to column, we get this layout here. And if we actually remove all settings from Bricks Builder, nothing happens because the default is actually this column. So by clicking here on row, we're actually updating Bricks Builder to use what the browser would have used by default. Now, I haven't quite wrapped my head around why that is the case, why Bricks Builder didn't use the browser default. If you know, do drop a comment below. I'm sure if I actually spent some time to really play around and consider it, I'd probably find why they did that. But yeah, for now, that's just something that I've just realized and I'm not quite sure why. So now that we've got our flex direction set to row, let's go ahead and inside here, let's make this column just a bit taller than the others. So I'm just going to paste some more text in there. And then I'm going to click back into our parent, so the container. With our flex direction set to row, you know that the main axis for Flexbox is going along the row, so along the x-axis, which means the cross-axis is going vertically down. So back here in Bricks Builder, we just need to look for our icons for our cross-axis, which is here, align cross-axis, and then we can come over to here and click on stretch, and now they're stretched the same height. And if we want to add the gutter between them, we can go to column gap and we can set something like 2 rem, and now that adds 2 rem in between. Now, it might be confusing that if we're setting up here flex direction to be row, but then we're setting a column gap and not a row gap, that's because up here, flex direction, these are actual CSS properties that you can write inside your CSS here. And we know that because if we hover on direction here, it shows us what that CSS property is, flex-direction. If we go down to align items on the cross axis to stretch, if we hover here, it's align-items, which we know we could write here, align-items. Column gap, if we hover on that, nothing shows, there's no tooltip, and row gap the same. That's because Bricks Builder has just made these themselves. So column gap, you're adding gap between your columns. So for me, it is a little bit confusing the more I understand Flexbox and flex direction being set to row. Then like, would my brain want to set the row gap? I'm not quite sure, but I'm getting used to it, and that's just the way that Bricks Builder works. So it's just worth pointing out that that's what they're doing there. I don't think it's right or wrong. I think it's just a usability thing that I wanted to point out at this stage in the video. But coming back to the design that we just built, we've got our equal height columns. It's all looking good. But now I want to point out that we actually had to specify that align items on the cross axis were stretch. Because if we undo that, they're not stretching. And if we do it, they are. But back here in our custom CSS, align items is stretched by default. We know that's the default that CSS uses. So let's actually investigate why that's the case and why it doesn't work like that in Bricks Builder. So let's go ahead and just remove our stretch value from the align items property, and we'll save this. And then let's preview this on the front end. I'm just going to right click and inspect. I'm just going to move myself over here, and let's look for our container, which is going to be here. And then let's go down to the computer tab, which shows us all the CSS that is applying here in our browser, and go down. We can see that align items is set to flex start. And you can see that it's bolder. The opacity is at 100%, where the browser rendered properties are a bit more grayed out. So we know that this is actually applied. Align items being flex start. That's not default browser behavior. Something's actually setting that here in our browser. So if I go to styles and we go through the CSS, let's see if we can find it. And it's right here. Bricks Builder by default inside their CSS that comes with a theme, they set for the container elements their align items to be flex start. If we actually unchecked that, you can see now they stretch the full height of the cross axis. So Bricks Builder by default is setting align items flex start. But if we uncheck that, now it's using the default browser value, which is align items stretch. And so that's why we have a difference between default native CSS and in Bricks Builder, where we do in fact have to click stretch here. So if you followed along everything in today's video, you should have a really good understanding of not only how to quickly go out and create equal columns inside of Bricks Builder, but you now understand the fundamental CSS and the principles of Flexbox that Bricks Builder is using to lay out your pages and your designs in Bricks Builder. If you want to learn more about Flexbox, I would definitely recommend watching my most recent video here on YouTube, Learn Bricks Builder plus Flexbox in 12 minutes. I go through some core concepts of Flexbox and some more things that Bricks Builder does with Flexbox. We go through writing some custom code like you saw in today's video. And where today we looked at display flex, flex direction, justify content, and align items, in my most recent video here, I actually go through some other concepts that you're probably going to want to know if you're building websites using Flexbox and Bricks Builder. So I'm going to link to this video here in the description of today's video, and it's also going to be on your screen now. Don't forget to subscribe because I have a lot of content like this coming out in the future. I'll see you in that video on the screen now.